What's going on, guys? My name is Tanner, and I am here for the first time to do a movie review. Now, this particular movie is Godzilla Minus One, just recently released in theaters December 1st. I was lucky enough to get a early fan screening on Wednesday, the 29th of November. Now, with this being said, I am a lifelong Godzilla fan. I've been following the franchise, obviously, since its first release in 1954. I've seen every single movie, including the Japanese, the MonsterVerse, and now it was time to see Godzilla Minus One. And all I gotta say is, coming out of that movie, I was blown away. I went into it with super high expectations. I've been following all the updates, the trailers, some of the leaks and everything, so I had a pretty good idea of what I was getting into when I went and seen it, so my expectations were sky high. With that being said, when it was all said and done, I was blown away. What Takashi Yamazaki was able to accomplish with less than a tenth of the budget for the MonsterVerse films, this budget came in at $15 million. And I gotta say, guys, it looks like this is a $150 million movie. Some of the VFX and everything that was done are on par or surpass its MonsterVerse counterparts. And there were times looking at Godzilla, especially during the water sequences, that you felt like you were looking at a real creature. Now, I may get into spoiler territory a little bit later, but I gotta say, again, the movie throughout was a 10 out of 10 for me. This is the first movie where I actually gave all the shits about the main characters. And you kind of develop these relationships with the characters. It starts off with Koichi Shikishima, who is a failed kamikaze pilot. With that being said, he fakes engine trouble to get out of giving his life for his country and lands on the island of Odo Island, which may be reminiscent back to 1954's original Godzilla, where he first made landfall in that movie. Now, there's also a little bit of Easter eggs for you eagle-eyed viewers out there. The first one that I picked up was there's a scene where he's sitting on the beach and there's dead fish coming up, and that's basically signifying that Godzilla is going to be arriving. There's a giant hill in the background, which is very reminiscent of 1954's Godzilla, which he first makes landfall on Odo Island and rears his head over that hill. For me as a kid seeing that movie, that was a very haunting image to see. And speaking of haunting, Godzilla makes landfall on Odo Island. That is actually like a military garrison to repair airplanes that were going to fly out to Pearl Harbor, obviously for kamikaze pilots to fulfill their mission. So Shikishima, he lands there, and we're talking like 15 minutes into the film, shit is going down. So a smaller version of Godzilla shows up. Let's just call it the Gojira creature, which is originally referred to in 1954 as well. Again, like I stated, when the dead fish start to float up, that's kind of your indication he's going to show up. And show up he does. He shows up at night, and all I got to say is he may be small, but he is not lacking any sort of aggression at all. And basically when he shows up, all hell breaks loose, and he is absolutely terrifying. He's about 25% larger than like the T-Rexes you see like in the Jurassic Park films, but his attitude is 125%. He is absolutely smashing, biting, grabbing, throwing people. He uses his tail. There's not an appendage that this smaller Godzilla is not using to wreak havoc and destruction. Now, with that said, obviously there's a little bit of survivor's guilt with our protagonist here not fulfilling his mission. And he actually has a opportunity to shoot Godzilla with his 20 millimeter guns on his aircraft. And upon trying to do so, he freezes up. Godzilla basically looks him in the eye. He knows he can probably get that shot off, but Godzilla is going to instantly kill him. And because he freezes up, unfortunately, every single person on the island perishes, except for one lead mechanic, who comes into play a little bit later in the film. With that being said, he returns to his home, a district near Ginza, and he is unfortunate to find that the entire place has been firebombed by the United States. His parents are gone. A lot of his neighbors are gone. His house is destroyed. And there he finds his neighbor, and she basically is like, "You're not supposed to be back here. You're a kamikaze pilot." And says that he's a disgrace. If he was going to carry out his mission, then her children would be alive, which we all know is probably not true. But anyway, as the story progresses, he meets a young woman who has a small child. Now, this child is not hers. It has kind of just been abandoned, obviously, through all the war devastation that has happened. And she ends up moving in with him. Her name is Noriko. The child's name is Akiko. And basically, they start a family, if you will. And that's a lot of the themes that play out on here is post-traumatic stress, survivor's guilt, and basically what is a family. In this case, they are not intimately involved. Our protagonist is, he's just torn from all the devastation and the PTSD from failing his mission, and he's unable to get, intimately close to anything for fear of losing it, like a lot of people probably were in that time. As the story proceeds, there's a little bit of a time skip. It jumps to 1947, where they're able to slowly rebuild what unfortunately was destroyed. In that meantime, our protagonist, Koichi, he ends up getting a job on a small wooden ship to recover sea mines that were left over from the war. Now, this ship is supposedly purposefully built to do this, and by that they mean it is a rickety wooden ship that won't attract the dangerous magnet mines. So as our protagonist is slowly building this beautiful camaraderie with his shipmates, things are slowly kind of starting to look up. He's getting a job. He's getting some more income to where he's able to slowly just rebuild everything and take care of Noriko and Akiko. But as time kind of goes on, the truth is revealed. They come upon a destroyed warship, a United States warship, and they're asking themselves, what could have done this? It looks like an absolute monster destroyed this thing. Where the scientist aboard the boat, who is in charge of the mission, says this really isn't our only mission. We're supposed to gather mines in order to protect ourselves from this creature. At that point, we get our first view of full-size, atomic-baptized Godzilla, and my gosh, he is absolutely formidable. He is a force. He looks incredible. I absolutely love this design of Godzilla. And a lot of these scenes are reminiscent of Jaws. Just the uncertainty that anything could happen. And they're on this little rickety boat, just kind of like in Jaws. From there, there's a chase sequence that happens. And they're able to drop a couple mines into the water to try to deter Godzilla. First one striking his spines, which does absolutely nothing. And the second one they're able to get in his mouth. And our protagonist is able to use a onboard gun to shoot the mine. And it explodes in Godzilla's mouth. And at that point, you're like, there's nothing that could survive that. You're wrong. So Godzilla kind of limp in the water. You're thinking, God, these guys maybe did it. At that point, his face starts to regenerate at a super rapid rate. And even his eyeball regenerates and rotates around and looks at our protagonist and his crew. And the sense of dread that you have for these characters, again, like I said, you really care for these characters. And there's no sense of, protagonist plot armor. You really think they could die at any time. And especially given the stakes, you're really invested in these guys. So basically at that point, a Japanese military ship comes. I forget the name of it. But right when Godzilla's about ready to just absolutely destroy this small fishing vessel, the military ship ends up firing on him. And you can actually see it's doing a little bit of damage, but nothing to really slow him down at all. So at this point, Godzilla dives under the water, goes after the ship, jumps on the ship, and is just absolutely tearing it apart. And the guns are rotating and firing, and they end up hitting him to where he falls off the ship. And then at that point, we get our first glimpse of the atomic breath. Now, in this particular instance, it's kind of a tease. You see the water glowing blue, very reminiscent to Godzilla vs. Kong. And you see a beam shoot up through the center of the boat and absolutely annihilates it. It is not like a beam splitter cutting beam. It is just a freaking explosion. At that point, Godzilla does retreat back into the ocean and leaves our protagonist alone, where now our protagonist has even more things to be added to his PTSD. So at that point, he goes back and doesn't really tell anybody, and Noriko ends up getting a job in Ginza, and at that point, these nightmares are plaguing our protagonist, and one night, Noriko comes to his side, and he ends up explaining everything to her, from the failed kamikaze mission to not being able to pull the trigger for his military personnel on Odo Island, all the way to the recent attack that just happened, and basically tells her about Godzilla. Fast forward a little bit, it's Noriko's first day on the job, and she ends up taking the train in Ginza, and at this point, we learn that Godzilla is going to make landfall in Ginza. When this happens, again, normally as a Godzilla fan, you're like, I can't wait to see Godzilla, I can't wait to see the stuff he tears up. But when you see him close to our main characters, you're just like, no, I don't want to see him kill these people. I really care about these people. But that's exactly what happens. He shows up, and Noriko's looking out the train, and basically says, "Is that Godzilla?" And Godzilla makes landfall, absolutely destroys everything. And at one point, the tanks are firing upon Godzilla, and Godzilla uses his atomic breath again. And guys, I gotta say, like, as a child, I always look forward to see what the atomic breath was gonna look like in the movies. And in here, it is unbelievable. It is the most insane thing ever. His spikes charge up, they protrude from his back, and then when he's ready to fire, they shoot in. And when he fires the atomic breath, I mean, stuff around it that's not even in contact is getting destroyed. And it is like a nuclear bomb goes off and obviously destroys everything. At that point, Noriko and Koichi went into Ginza to rescue Noriko, and they're kind of close to this explosion. They just see this blast wave coming towards them, and Noriko pushes Koichi into an alley to try to save him. And it looks like she just gets annihilated. And obviously, you're excited to see Godzilla tear stuff up, but you're also like moved to tears because you just really care about our protagonist here, and he just keeps taking loss after loss after loss. And basically, there's the black rain that falls out after a nuclear explosion. And again, I can't speak enough about the VFX in this movie. They're absolutely phenomenal. And basically, after that happens, they come up with a plan to try to basically sink Godzilla in the ocean. Due to ocean pressure, they think it's going to hurt him, possibly kill him, and if not, they're going to bring him up with these life rafts to try to give him, I guess, the kaiju version of the bins. So they assemble a team, and at this point, Koichi is reaching out, trying to find a plane. They end up finding a plane. It's a prototype. None of the Zeros had ejector seats, but this prototype plane, I guess, came with an ejector seat, but that's a little bit later. So he ends up reaching out and finally finds the mechanic. The mechanic fixes the plane, and everything is set to go for the mission. So the day comes of the mission. Godzilla ends up actually making landfall. They're going to try to sink him over this trench. But it's Koichi's job to use the plane to lure him back into the ocean, and that he does. So they set up all these ships that are supposed to wrap this Freon gas around him to actually sink him, and the plan is going off very well. They set a decoy ship up knowing that Godzilla was probably going to use his atomic breath, and that he does. He ends up using his atomic breath in the ocean, which, again, is phenomenal. I mean, it's like a nuclear explosion over the ocean, and he hits a decoy ship with it. The ship explodes, and many of the people that haven't seen his atomic breath before are like, oh my god, there's no way we're carrying through with this mission. We're all going to die. But then the lead scientist says that, hey, he's got to recharge a little bit. So they carry out with the mission. Long story short, they end up sinking Godzilla. It doesn't kill him, so they use the rafts to try to bring him up. He ends up destroying the rafts, gets caught somewhere around 800 meters, which at that point, they're trying to just pull him up with these ships, but they don't have enough thrust. So then a kind of side character comes back into play with a army of tugboats. They attach onto the main ships, and they are trying to pull Godzilla up. And they do succeed, and Godzilla does look obviously hurt. He's bloated, got some weird stuff going on there. And at that point, he charges up his atomic breath again. And you fear for these guys. You're just like, this is it. Nothing can survive this. Well, Koichi comes in at the last moment with his aircraft, and he is loaded with bombs. He's loaded with everything. And he is going to fly straight into Godzilla's mouth to, quote-unquote, complete his mission and make sure his war is over. With that being said, you see the atomic breath charge up. Godzilla's mouth is wide open. Koichi flies his aircraft into Godzilla's mouth, and then you see an explosion. Most of Godzilla's head is gone. The atomic beams then start to seep out, very reminiscent of Godzilla GMK, and his body just falls apart. And everybody thinks Koichi is gone, and basically in the background you see a parachute gliding down. This prototype aircraft, as previously stated, had an ejector seat, and thus carries forward Koichi's will to live in the wake of all this devastation and destruction. And after that, after he lands, everybody's happy. Godzilla's presumed dead, and he gets a telegram that Noriko's in the hospital. So him and Akiko, they go visit the hospital, and there's Noriko, and the final line of the movie is your war over? Brought tears to my eyes. Obviously, as a Godzilla fan, everybody in the theater was tearing up. Overall, again, phenomenal movie. But then at the very end, at the bottom of the ocean, you see a piece of Godzilla's flesh, and it's regenerating. So it kind of builds that hype up that Godzilla is obviously not dead. I'm not going to say it necessarily sets it up for a sequel, but again, it's just a little bit of hype to all those Godzilla fans that, we don't want our boy to die. So again, phenomenal movie, 10 out of 10 for me. All the cinema critics are absolutely loving this movie. I think at the time of this video, it has a 98% on Rotten Tomatoes, and the audience score is in the 90s as well. So please go out and see this movie. You will absolutely not be disappointed. It is phenomenal. So again, my name's Tanner. Thanks again for sticking around to the end of the video, and have a good one.